My name's Jason. So first, just a few guidelines. KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. This applies to everything, and it applies to visuals, okay? So here's an example. There's just a lot going on here. And when I look at this visual, I actually look here in the center because there's so much going on. I don't even see the numbers on the side. There's just so many visuals going on. I'm like, oh, look at the pretty people, look at the ducks. I don't even see the numbers. Okay, there's just so much going on here. So you need to show restraint. Okay, so when you're going through it, show restraint. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. Okay, just keep it simple. Just keep it to the story. Don't go over extreme. Empty space is a good thing. You'll see this in a second, but basically the empty space lets your eyes know where to look, where to follow the story. Within this last example, there is no empty space. It's just stuff everywhere, and your eyes are just like, where do I go? Where do I go? Where do I go? And you just get overwhelmed. Then the last thing is just avoid lots of everything. Text, numbers, visuals, keep it simple. Okay, just stick to the story. So some more examples. This is one of my first stories, I have to say, and it's not very good. Okay, so it's basically somebody somewhere put out a report, and we basically determined that Georgia was the #1 software pirate in the world. But the problem was, we ended up showing like 50 countries. This is not necessary. This is way too much. I mean, I don't even, looking back at this now, I'm not even going to sit here and go through each and every single country. So what would have been better is probably just like one row. Maybe the Georgia is first, USA is last, some relevant countries in between, but just keep it simple. Here is a simple one where there's lots of empty space, okay? Your eyes know it's about a day in the life of a Marshuka driver. And you can your eyes can see that there's a path to follow. There's lots of empty space, okay? So if you compare it to that first example, this one is much easier to follow. There's like a path. You know where to go to see it. Here, it's just a mess. There's just so much going on, your eyes don't know where to go. So that's why empty space is a good thing. Length. Are you actually ever going to read through all of these visuals? Okay. And I'll say this first one is actually ours. And when we printed it out, it was about this tall, okay? So even if it's online, you're not gonna read it. But if you print it out, can you imagine somebody like going and, okay, it's not gonna happen. So as with a story, keep it short and sweet. The shorter, the better, but you need to be able to tell your story. So it has to be a balancing act between enough story, but keeping it short. One way to help with this is just limit the number of talking points. If you feel that you do have to have a long story, consider actually splitting it out into maybe several different infographics or facts or something. Don't just do one big one. Or do one big one as like the final result, but then have some shorter ones as part of a campaign so they can see it over time. And then if they want one big master one, they can have that too. Colors. Obviously, don't overwhelm the eyes. Use colors to highlight numbers and words. I'll explain this in a second. But pick colors that actually fit the mood of the story. So if you're talking about something happy, use happy colors. If you're talking about something kind of not happy, use not happy colors, because it just kind of helps fit the mood of the story. It helps the people feel it. Okay? So as an example, this is about sex selection of abortion. Okay, so this is really about girls because women are having abortions to have boys instead. And so we picked the color pink just to have that girl feel. So that's picking color for the mood. Then on top of that, if you see, we kind of made these words stick out. So you don't actually have to read the whole thing. You just automatically say 9% of women, abortion, prenatal sex selection. So even though it's already short, you're just kind of highlighting the main piece. You don't even have to like highlight all of this. We could just say like 9%. Like 9% abortions, sex selection. That would be fine. But just doing little highlights, whether it's color, bigger text, it just helps things stand out a little bit more. And this works for facts, for infographics, for anything where you're dealing with numbers, presentations, whatever. Just a little bit to make something stand out. Because again, you will actually read that first before you read the whole thing. And then we did a story about LGBT community. And so we just incorporated the rainbow colors as part of our charts. So again, it just kind of, I want to say, fits the mood, but it fits the subject matter. And it's not bright, crazy rainbow colors. It's just nice, subtle rainbow colors. But it fits the story. Numbers, everybody's favorite subject. So for numbers, just a couple things. One is chart scales. When you're doing a chart, make sure it always starts at 0. And I'll show you why in a second. And the second part is to make sure that the scale of the chart is linear. And I'll show you an example of that in a second. Then the last one is large numbers. People have a very hard time understanding or comprehending large numbers, like 10,000 of this, 3 million of this, 10 billion of that. So actually take it and put it into context, okay? Get it into a smaller number. And I'll give you an example of that in a sec, okay? So this is why scales, or you should always start at 0, okay? So if you're just looking at this, you're like, oh, that's a big difference. But you don't actually pay attention to the numbers, and you see it actually starts at 50 and only goes to 52. So when you actually started at 0, it's like, oh, that's really, I think, that's not that much of a difference. Okay, so when even though this is both the same thing, this is actually kind of lying to your audience. It's misguiding them, thinking that there actually is something there, when in reality, there's not. Okay, so it's a small thing, but just always start at 0. Okay. So this one, it looks nice visuals lined up, you get an idea for it, but then you look at the scale. You got 8%, 11%, 14%, 18%, 19%, 30%. Okay, so this is what I mean by the scale should be linear. So in this case, 19 to 30, what is this? So you got 19 to 30 here, so is this 25, is it 20? You have no idea what it is, okay? So just keep it nice and consistent here. This is putting large numbers into context. In Georgia, Stalin is actually still seen as a popular person. He's from Georgia, and so that's primarily why. And there's a local organization that does a yearly survey, and they found that something like 45% still see Stalin in a favorable way. And so the title of this was that, Georgia, your hero is a mass murderer. And so then what we did was we're saying, okay, he killed about 20 to 60 million people, but that's a large number. It's hard to understand that. And so we broke it down. We said, okay, 1 million people were in prison or exiled. And that's equivalent to 18 times the local football stadium. So you can think of a football stadium, 18 of them, that's how many people were sent to prison or exiled. It's easier to comprehend that, and you get a better grasp of that than just 1 million people. So like another one is 9 million peasants were forced off their lands. That's equal to 2.5 times the population of Georgia. So you can just say, okay, everyone in Georgia 2.5 times over is forced to leave. It's easier to comprehend. And you can see this like in the news, like when the news reports, 10 billion euro for this, or 3 million refugees or whatever, your mind just kind of shuts off because you can't comprehend that. But when you start putting into a context like this, you're like, oh, okay, that makes sense, and wow, that's a huge number. Okay. Always add a source. Okay, this is how you kind of give credibility to your story. So like if you get it from like a local government or something like that, just add the name of the government agency, their website. But also if you took data and analyzed it and had to manipulate it, also put a link to your data set. So that also gives you credibility. People can see what you did. Hopefully you made no mistakes, but at least you're putting it out there and you're saying, hey, I'm okay with it. Here's my data. Okay, it gives them confidence. This one's kind of tricky. So if you have your own website, so CMS stands for Content Management System. So if you have your own website and you start doing these visuals, you need to make sure that your website actually supports whatever visuals you're doing. So for instance, if you're doing a video, can you actually embed a video? Or if you're doing like a tall infographic, if you think about it, like your content area is usually pretty small. And so what we typically do is make it so when you click on it, you get a bigger version. Does your website even allow for that? Like when we first started it, we built our own website to show our visuals. And so we had that there. But when we started doing it for other people, we took it for granted until like, hey, why does this look so bad? Like, oh, you don't have a pop-up? No, we can't do that. And like, oh. Before you even get into creating the visual, make sure if you're going to put it on your website, that your website can actually support it. SEO stands for Search Engine Optimization. If you're doing infographics, facts, all of your data is stuck inside an image, and that image cannot be searched, okay? So you need to, like say if you're doing a Facebook post, you can add the image, but then in the description, add the text from your infographic, or at least the highlights, so that if people search, they can actually find your infographic, your fact, your visual. Or if you're loading it onto your own website, when you load an image, there's usually a box that has something like description or comment or alternative text. Put stuff there. It won't be visible on your website, but the search engines will find it and they will use that. So if somebody actually goes and does an image search, your image will pop up. Okay? It's a minor thing, like we didn't even think of that until probably a year later, like, hey, how come our visuals aren't showing up? It's because we weren't doing it properly. So these are just a couple little random things. If you're collecting data, and if you're not doing it yourselves, like if you're hiring a data collection agency to do it for you, get the original data files. Like at least in Georgia, it's pretty common that these data agencies just give their clients a report and they keep the data files. The data files is where all your power is. You can use it to tell many more stories later on. And if the data agency is only giving you a summary report, it's only what they think is important. And they're not even going to include all the possible analyses. The next one is, if you don't have the capacity to do the designs yourself and you hire a designer, same thing, ask for the working file. Like if they use Photoshop, Illustrator, or whatever it is, get that working file. It's yours, you paid for it. So that if later on you want to use it for something else or make a little change, like maybe you have an event. So one year you have this date, the next year you just need to change the date. Okay, you don't need to hire them again. Get those design files, it's very important. And the last thing is, if you are hiring a designer, not all designers are equal. Okay, for this kind of thing, ideally you want somebody that understands the process of telling a story. Many designers, they know how to work with photos, or they can create a website, but that doesn't mean they know how to tell a story. Tool time. Okay, so first thing I want to talk about, Night Lab. So if you have the ability to do online stories, like interactive stories on your website, check this site out. We have used 3 of these 4. So Juxtapose lets you compare 2 images, and you can slide a bar, so it's kind of like a before and after. So like in this example, this is Sochi, like before and after the Olympics. And then you can take this bar and slide it back and forth. So if you have anything to like compare images against each other, you can go here, you load the image, you can say like when the first one was, when the second one was, any kind of credits or anything like that, and then it gives you the embed code, and you can stick it on your website. Okay. The next one is SoundSite, and this is for audio. So within the text of your story, you can actually have like a little play button to say more about some sentence or some phrase. So it doesn't have to be part of your text story, but it's like an additional thing. So as you're reading this, if you push the play button, it'll start playing audio that's relevant to this. So it's just a way to kind of embed audio as part of your story. Google, if you're into using the Google tools for storytelling, okay, there's lots of them. This NewsLab site here, they actually have a training of how to use all the different tools regarding storytelling. And it's all free, but there's a lot of different trainings out there. So if you use any of the Google tools, it even has like stuff about AdWords and everything else. Check this out and see if it might help you. Okay. So, GIFs. There are online tools for making GIFs. So I put 3 of them here. And basically, you can obviously search for your own too. But basically, you just load images, and then it sticks them all together into a GIF. So if you have somewhat, like if you just have pictures, or if you do something like in Photoshop or something, you can then just take all of these, go to like one of these sites or any online tool and just create a GIF. Okay. So that's anything like that's possible. Then we have these multimedia story tools. This first one is Story Builder. This is what we created. This is a free tool. Let's see, I don't know if there's any good stories in here to show you. Let's go to the end. So you can have like, you can have audio, you can have movies. So like you can embed objects in here. So you can have slideshows. You can have background sound. So that was just background sound as part of the slideshows. So you can build these kind of things. It looks very nice, but I'll warn you that the admin interface, because we basically had to build it for free, is not pretty. So it's a bit of a struggle to use it. Once you figure it out, it works. And we actually also give you the ability to download the complete code for it. So if you just want to use this to build a story, then you can put it on your own website. Graphics. So for those of you that can't afford Adobe, like Photoshop, Illustrator, these are some free alternatives. Okay. So Inkscape is the Illustrator alternative, and GIMP is the Photoshop alternative. They're not as great as Adobe, but they'll get the job done.